Hello, and welcome to this month's Dolby Atmos Music Community Sessions. I'm Ben Givers with Dolby Laboratories, and in this month's conversation, I am super excited to be joined by two guests, legendary mix engineer and producer, the Senator, Mr. Jimmy Douglas, and mix engineer Kiara Moreno from their studio, The Magic Mix Room in beautiful Miami, Florida. Jimmy, as I am sure many of you know very well, is a 4-time Grammy Award winner and mix engineer on some huge records with Timbaland, including artists such as Aaliyah, Missy, Jay-Z, Genuine, Justin Timberlake, and Snoop Dogg, just to name a few. And going back further, Jimmy was an engineer with Atlantic Records back in the day, working with artists such as the Rolling Stones, Slave, Odyssey, Gang of Four, Roxy Music. Jimmy's equipped his Miami studio for Dolby Atmos, and together with mix engineer Kiara Moreno, they have done Atmos mixes for artists like COASTCITY and Justin Timberlake, and they're going to share with us how they've equipped the studio, what they like to do using the Atmos toolset, and a bit about the mentorship program that Jimmy offers at his Magic Mix Room. Kiara will share her background and how she's used Atmos on the Justin records, and they are both awesome, and they'll answer your questions live. So please add those questions for Jimmy and Kiara here in the GoTo app, or you can email your questions to musicwebinars@dolby.com. Before we jump into that, I wanted to share a couple of quick updates from the Dolby Atmos music world. First, a few updates from Dolby Institute at dolby.com/institute. Being a new addition to the Dolby Atmos Music Creation tutorial video series, with this episode exploring mixing workflows and creative techniques featuring engineers Natalia Schlesinger and Robin Rumors of Art House and Abbey Road Institute, Miami, who you may know from previous sessions that we've done here together. And together in this video, they break down their Dolby Atmos mix for an emerging artist named RZA and her track Miracle, including how they set up the session, how they use their buses and sends, their creative techniques for panning vocals and instruments, how they bass manage and use the LFE channel, and their use of the binaural settings plugin, some other cool effects plugins that they use, and also how they QC. They've also provided a downloadable template that you can use in your own Pro Tools sessions, and it is really a great in-depth tutorial that shows how they work together to complete their Dolby Atmos mix there at Art House in Miami. Also from Dolby Institute is the self-paced learning curriculum that you're probably familiar with, which has now been updated and is contained within a new learning management system with improved navigation and layout, which super cool, also allows you to save and track your progress. So this new platform shares your same user credentials with the Dolby Atmos user forum, as well as the software downloads area on customer.dolby.com. Those are all linked into the new platform, so everything is all in one place now. The music curriculum is still available in 5 languages. It's now much easier to navigate, and again, you can save and track your progress as you go. It's a great update there from Dolby Institute. Over at our YouTube channel and our pro site, which is professional.dolby.com, we have just dropped a new Hear from the Masters video featuring 7-time Grammy Award-winning mix engineer Luis Barrera Jr. Luis has mixed some of Latin music's biggest artists, including Daddy Yankee, Maluma, Mark Anthony, Camilo, and many more. And in this video, he takes us inside his Miami studio, talks about his upbringing in music, how the multicultural vibe in Miami influences him, how he put his studio together, and what using Dolby Atmos allows him to achieve creatively and for artists. It's great vibes with Luis as always, so be sure to check that out. We just hung out with Luis in Las Vegas during Latin Grammys week, where he was nominated for several and won, and he's joined us for a special studio open house in Las Vegas. It's Studio DMI sharing some of his mixes. And I wanted to give a special shout out to the Studio DMI crew in Las Vegas for being absolutely amazing hosts for us during Latin Grammys week. So Luca, Tommy, Tori, Robert, and Alex, thank you all so much. And for our viewers, if you're in Las Vegas, check out Studio DMI. They're awesome. And also a special shout out to everybody who came through to hang at the open house and our party. At our Pro Site and YouTube channel, you can also check out a few other pieces of new artist spotlight content, including 2 from absolute legends. First, Brian Eno talks about his use of Dolby Atmos on his new artist album, Forever and Ever No More. Secondly, Jean-Michel Jarre breaks down the process of creating his new album, oxymoron, and how, in his own words, it creates a whole new galaxy of possibilities for musicians. This is a super cool one as well. We also get a little sneak peek at a few of his modular synths. We see some of Brian Eno's synths as well in that piece. So check that out. Don't want to miss it. We also dropped a new piece highlighting Italian DJ, producer, and sound designer Enrico Sangiuliano from this year's ADE, where he invited fans to listen to his 9 to 0 album in Dolby Atmos at Abbey Road Institute in Amsterdam. It's a super cool into what Enrico does with Dolby Atmos. Special shout out to Jasper and Dennis at Abbey Road Institute in Amsterdam. And if you haven't yet, be sure to also check out another piece that we dropped a couple of weeks back featuring legendary New Jersey house music producer and DJ Kerry Chandler on our site, where he takes you inside the recording of his new album, Spaces and Places, including the track Back to Earth, which he recorded on the dance floor of the Knockdown Center in Queens. He mixed the album in Atmos himself. Check that out. All of these that are mentioned are available on enabled streaming services in Atmos now. Okay, a quick reminder that our studios onboarding page is your direct link for new and existing studios to connect with our studio teams around the world for integration support, reseller connections, and really anything you may need that way. Also, our creative and labels onboarding pages at professional.dolby.com are the link for new mixers and labels to connect with Dolby's music partnerships team directly for any support you may need along the way, be that tools, best practices, any parts of the Dolby Atmos music ecosystem you may need a hand with or have questions on. You can connect with us there. Of course, you can also email musicrelations@dolby.com. So in last month's music community session, we talked with Nashville mix engineer Jeff Balding about the great work he's doing in Dolby Atmos and some of his tips for creating compelling headphone mixes using the tool set. Of course, Jeff's worked with some of the icons of the music business, including the Eagles, Taylor Swift, the Judds, Blake Shelton, Rascal Flatts, and he shares with us how he uses different instruments and vocals with the Dolby Atmos tool set, specifically with the binaural settings plugin, and how he QCs and monitors on different playback systems. A few sessions before that, we took a deep dive into the Dolby Atmos album assembler tool with Dolby's Jordan Glasgow and featuring Georgetown masters Andrew Mendelson and Luke Armentrout. If you haven't yet checked out the Dolby Atmos album assembler, which of course is a mastering tool for Atmos music that allows you to apply your finishing touches to songs and albums, you can grab a free trial for that at professional.dolby.com. All right, let's jump over to our chat with Jimmy Douglas and Kiara Moreno. I am very happy to welcome to this music community session engineer Kiara Moreno and producer and engineer, the Senator, Mr. Jimmy Douglas. Thank you so much for being here, both of you, and welcome.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
So you're both based in beautiful Miami, Florida, at your studio, Jimmy, where you hold your workshops, but you came up in New York studios working alongside some of the great mix engineers and working with some of the biggest bands and artists. Can you tell us a little bit about the early days for you coming up in the industry and maybe some of the memorable projects you've worked on?
So the early days for me were great. I grew up at Atlantic Studios, Records, because it was the record company and the studio all in one package. So I got to be with some of the great record executives, Ahmet Ertegun, Jerry Wexler. And then, of course, they were also great producers, along with Arif Mardin. And then, of course, the great Tommy Dowd, one of the great engineers. So that's how I learned, cut my teeth, and I worked, for those people, and I learned the industry from that part. I was very lucky because it was Atlantic Records. Great talent came walking through the door all the time. There was never any time to teach anybody anything. Either you figured it out and you watched it, and then there would be like, Hall & Oates come in, and are you ready? And the answer is always yes, even though I wasn't ready, but I was ready. So, yeah, I mean, that's some of the people, and I got to work with the Rolling Stones, Aretha Franklin, some Donny Hathaway. I mean, I can keep going on and on and on. The list is incredible because their roster was incredible, and it wasn't like, you had to be good and you had to keep up, but it's like the people were coming through the door anyway. So that's my blessing. Oh, wait, and Foreigner. I keep forgetting Foreigner. That's really a small fact.
Okay. That's incredible. Those are some amazing acts and incredible legendary acts. And coming up in New York City in that time, wow, like what an exciting journey that must have been to get going on. Kiara, you've worked with some amazing artists yourself, the likes of Pharrell, Timbaland, Snow Allegra, projects for Justin Timberlake. How did your interest start in music? And at what point did you know that you wanted to be an engineer?
I've always had an interest in music. I came up with a very musical family, filled with musicians. I only knew I wanted to become an engineer actually once I met Jimmy. A few months before that, I was just starting to learn how a song came together in a studio. And I got to meet him and learned a whole lot since then. So that's kind of how my journey started.
Amazing. So, Jimmy, you've been involved in mentorship and helping young engineers and artists and producers come up. You moved your operation to Miami, which is, certainly like one of the most vibrant cultural hubs in the world, and with so much amazing music energy going on there. How did your mentorship program and the Hang come together, and kind of what were your goals as you were putting that together?
Because of the way that I was given this ability to come into studios and be around, and even back in the day, I would always let my friends come in and see me doing stuff, which I don't really notice as they all tell me later. And you were so cool, you let me hang, and I'm like, I was busy working, I didn't realize it was about that. And there it is, I would let them hang, and so I like to pass on the goodness that I had, which was like there were people above me that were really professional that would always give me the glove and go, hey, go ahead. Phil Ramone is one of those people. I ended up in situations which were just like, they're not going to let me do this, and they would be like, sure, go for it. And I just wanted to. I like to pass that wand off whenever I can, because it's really through the youth that music is really appreciated. You know, young folks will die for the music. They will die for their stars. They'll follow them to the edge of the earth. As we get on, life kind of gets in the way. You got the house, the wife, the kids, all the stuff, and it's like, yeah, I love you, but I can't follow you to the end of the earth. So no, you pass it on. You pass the knowledge that you have on.
Love that. And what is your take on kind of the role of the mix engineer in the studio environment, kind of, and their dynamic with the producer, for example, and how do you kind of pass that on?
Well, I think for me, what's more interesting is like the dynamic of how it's all changing, because all three of those things you just mentioned are now becoming the same person. You know, there's no tape machines, there's no consoles, there's no bodies running around. It's one guy in a computer putting the thing together. And if he has the vision and he's learned enough information, he can make the whole record. Doesn't really need me. I didn't say that. But I'm just saying that position of, to me, I believe a really good producer has the vision of what it should sound like. And I think that nobody can do a better version of that than him, with the way the tools we have now. So the question is very interesting, and I ponder it every day, you know, because you don't really need the whole studio anymore, except when we're going to talk about maybe some of the Atmos thing. That's a whole other thing for me.
Kiara, you picked up this knowledge from Jimmy and his history and his pedigree in the industry and applied it to your passion for music, it sounded like, and that sort of like became an opportunity for a career. What were some of the key things that you picked up in those mentorship sessions and that you kind of thought, hey, this could really be something that I'm into?
I mean, it's kind of hard when someone like Jimmy offers you the opportunity to come and hang, right? You just say yes and you sit and you observe as much as you possibly can. For a long time, I would just kind of come around and sit behind him and just watch and listen. Did a lot of listening. Took a while to train my ears. But so, what did I pick up?
I'm sure a lot.
Honestly, it's a lot. There's a
Yeah.
there's a lot of stuff that I've learned with Jimmy, and just through all the different projects that we've done together over the years. So, I mean, Jimmy, I owe you lots of the things I know today are because of Jimmy. So he's been a great, huge part of my growth.
Awesome. Well, I'll ask you too then, in your opinion, what is the main role of the mix engineer in the studio?
Well, for the mix engineer, um, when I'm mixing a record, I'm doing my best to service the artist and the producer and service their vision for the project, whatever genre it may be. Because people have very different opinions on what their music can and should sound like. So I do my best to just service what they've already put together. Because by the time, if I'm just mixing a record, by the time I get to it, many people have touched it along the way or have worked on it along the way. So I really try to service their work as best I can and get it to a place where the communities and it can be commercially heard.
Awesome. I love that. And what an exciting opportunity to be able to create Atmos mixes for this work that's been done and handed over to you, right? And kind of give artists a new way to hear their music and put your touch on that. Jimmy, you've equipped your studio there for Dolby Atmos. Let's talk a little bit about kind of the choices you made. But I'm curious, kind of just in general, like what's the vibe of your studio, the Magic Mix Room?
It's just the vibe is basically it's a mixing room. It's a recording room as well, but especially now with with Atmos taking the front stage as it is, I'm trying to actually outfit that as a purpose, as well as mixing. I mean, obviously the mixing is there. I've been doing that since this high will continue. Uh, but in terms of like outfitting the room, I was like, what it was like there was so much misinformation in the beginning or no information, and it all happened in the middle of the pandemic. And if you were in LA, you would have had the benefit of like I guess Dolby coming down and showing you and with the hands and the fingers on, but the pandemic didn't allow that. So I was guided by a few couple of key people that were really helpful, but there was a lot of not information. And what I realized was that I had enough equipment here to actually make it happen without going out and spending a fortune to make it happen. Like, I say like the big boys. Wait, I am the big boy, but you know what I mean? Like those big studios, the commercial studios that are making lots of money and they're going out and buying all these amazing speakers and stuff. And I realized I don't think it has to be all that. Um, and for me, I had a career working with 5.1 and 7.1, so I was kind of already familiar with spreading stuff out. So it wasn't like, oh, it is different. It is definitely another level of it, but I wasn't kind of scared to just go ahead and try and help myself do that. And then the information started coming. Once it came together, information's everywhere. It's brilliant. It's great what you guys are doing actually.
Awesome, thanks. And it's exciting that you're a part of it as well. That's what it's all about is, bringing people together to create this experience as one, which is really, really cool. We're all sharing ideas. Different engineers and producers are showing each other what's possible, and there's a lot of excitement. So it's a great time. Kiara, you've mixed the Coast City record in particular, Wild Americanos, a really kind of fun record to listen to. Dug the work that you did on there. I'm curious, when you're setting up your session and kind of getting going, what's your process for kind of organizing and laying out the session? Sure, you've developed some templates that you're using. How do you kind of get going?
Sure. Well, I'm glad you liked the record. Thank you. The Coast City did an amazing job. They came to me already knowing that they were going to release their song in Atmos with Apple. They just needed someone to mix it in Dolby. So I'm so honored that they had me do it. I kind of set up my sessions similar to how I set up all of my sessions in terms of like where things are. I like my drums up top, vocals down at the bottom, and synths, guitars, everything sort of organized in between. And when it comes to laying out the song and spreading it spatially, I take my time bringing things out of the stereo spectrum, sort of one by one. And I really just like to experiment. I like to kind of play in the sandbox when it comes to Atmos mixing. I don't love templates too much. I use them, but I'm very quick at setting it up. So I don't, you know, it doesn't make too much of a difference for me. I spend that time sort of getting to know the record as I set it up instead of just like having it ready and just like diving right in. I like to explore the music as I'm setting up the session.
Nice. I think that's a good approach. So are you kind of like moving and rebalancing things simultaneously, or are you kind of like moving things and seeing what works?
Typically, I'm just kind of moving things and seeing what works. And when it comes to a place where I'm like, okay, like that could be cool there, I'll leave it. Maybe I'll rebalance it a little bit and then I'll move on to something else and I come back around. It's very like a little here, a little there, a little here, a little there. And then eventually you get a whole lot of movement.
Yeah. And the Coast City record, I mean, there's some really dynamic movements that I think enhance the emotion of the songs, like the pianos and synths in a song like Purple and Prince, for example. Are those like decisions that you're hearing as a mix engineer and making, or are you talking to the artist about those? Are they coming to you with those ideas in mind, or are you kind of experimenting?
Well, with Purple and Prince specifically, in the stereo mix, they had already had some hard panning going on. So I just sort of quite literally elevated the panning up top. So it created a very interesting sort of like circular motion around. And, that record has so many different scenes and messages that I was able to really have fun with movement. There are some records that have less movement than others. Wild Americanos was one specifically that was like exciting to move and have like dynamic objects all over the place.
Awesome. Um, Jimmy, I know you guys do work across all genres, but when it comes to working with like, pop, hip hop, R&B, where you have samples, 808s, low synths, and maybe also some like live and recorded drums, is there anything you approach Atmos when it comes to the low end with differently, depending on what the track might call for, or how have you found that, managing the low end in Atmos is the best treatment?
Well, so far, I've been actually redoing records that were done, and I do say when you're doing that, you have to be mindful and respect the record that was once already made, because people are used to hearing any mix you do, whether it's Atmos or stereo. There's a certain dimension that this soundscape has, and people that love it are used to hearing that soundscape. When it doesn't sound that way, the deal's off. It's kind of like having a house that used to be green and they come home and now the house is yellow. It's not going to work. It could be the best yellow paint in the world. It's just, you can make it, you go a little bit at a time. So I just usually, if I'm blessed enough, I'll get stems, and the stems should contain what the bottom felt like. If not, in the case of one of the Justin Timberlake albums I was doing, uh, I guess the guy who did it didn't have any notes or anything, so I was kind of going from the beginning and recreating the mix from ground floor. Um, that guy was me, by the way. I, how was I going to know that Atmos is going to come along and I was going to need that later? How would I know? Um, but yeah, so and in my case, fortunately, I knew the mind of the guy that did it, so I could kind of recreate it. Um, I kind of did stuff like he would do. Um, but other than that, I mean, I don't really. It's funny. I don't really look at any of those things. I think with Atmos, the thing that's most interesting is the bottom because of that sub, and then there's all this different dialogue back and forth. Whoa, you don't need the sub. Oh, it won't come out in the buds. It won't come out in the headphones. Blah blah blah. We're still a work in progress for all of us. Like you said earlier, we're all sharing information together, and we're trying to get to a place that's a common ground. So I don't really have the answer because I'll kind of depend on any given day, any given song. I'll do whatever I need to do to get there.
I'm curious from both of you, were there any songs that you've experienced where you started panning some elements around where maybe a new part of the song was exposed that you hadn't heard previously? Anything that was like more revealing than when you first heard it in stereo?
I have one. No. On that, but on the record, I was just talking about the Sexy Beck album. I think it's called Future Sex Love Songs. The thing is, there was so many elements in that record that we packed into stereo to get it to be the the great stereo record is. When you unravel it, suddenly you've got Timberland doing 4 8 tracks of all that beatboxing stuff, which all you heard was like right here, and now it's like it's really magic. And then we have a string section throughout the record, and now you got a string section, a whole string section doing their thing. The cellos, the strings, they're all over the place, and you're not really doing a lot except for letting the natural record breathe, which you never heard a lot of those parts before for this reason. Yeah, and even Justin, he's doing so many tracks of vocals. They were squashed, and now you let them breathe, and you're hearing parts, and you're hearing things that you kind of didn't hear before. It's very very revealing, that particular album.
That's awesome, Kiara. I can imagine that it's exciting for the artist to be able to hear elements of their song kind of more pronounced, or parts of their creation that maybe were hidden before. Have you had any aha moments from artists reacting or producers reacting to the work you've done in Atmos on their tracks?
All the time. I mean, I think when someone's coming in, most of the artists I've worked with doing Atmos mixes, they're hearing it for the first time in Atmos with me. So, like, there's a whole lot of smiles in the room. It's very contagious. It's a good time. Like when Coast City came in and they were able to hear it, it was just like Danny and John just had smiles as wide as their ears, you know. It was People get really excited when they're in the environment and they're able to really understand what Dolby Atmos and immersive audio is. Because before that, they're kind of like, oh, in my headphones, this sounds really cool. But when they're in a live space, they're like, whoa. That's when like their mind just goes, this is incredible. This is next level. This is like insane, you know?
So when it comes to QCing, Kiara, are you exporting the file and testing playback on different systems and also in headphones?
Absolutely. Um, I Both Jimmy and I have learned that QCing and listening through headphones, and honestly in many different headphones as we can, is an important part of delivering the mix properly, you know?
Awesome. Jimmy, is there any techniques like from your extensive stereo work that you've kind of brought into the Atmos world and been able to use? You mentioned a little bit about the low end, but is there anything else that you've kind of brought over?
For me, I kind of look at it like I'd like it to be simple, because simple will interpret more, and I think I personally find I'm more immersed when I just have things just kind of staggered one place. They all, and you get used to the vibe. I think of it like live players. That's what I do. The world doesn't have a lot of live playing anymore, but that's how I look at it. And one of the things that my experience in life from growing up with live players is that, like, you stand in a room when they're playing and you're in the center of the universe, and that's what I try to bring back into the speakers when I can with the Atmos thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I'm curious kind of what the reaction has been from maybe your colleagues or the people that you are mixing for when they hear Atmos in your room.
I have had the pleasure, I must say, of people saying to me, literally, they go, "This is one of the most favorite." Some of the records, and they go, "This particular record is one of my favorite records. I learned everything off of da da this," but they said, "I just feel I'm immersed in here," and I didn't use that word. No, I'm very serious. And when they do that, I go, "Shit, I guess I did it," because that's it. You feel like you're immersed in the middle of this thing.
Yeah, that's awesome. I've had people give me a similar reaction and feedback to it, particularly it being more revealing in songs that they thought that they knew so well. Like you're saying, like hearing elements of these tracks that they didn't even know were played that way or sounded that way when they've got kind of this more room to breathe. It's really exciting. Um, Kiara, what's coming up for you? Is there anything that you're working on that you can talk about that you're excited about, or anything you can share that you've got going on?
There are a couple of albums and some other projects in the works. I cannot talk about some of them, But one album that will be coming out is doing the Atmos mixing for Isabella Love Stories, a more hardcore album. I mean, it sounds great. We're still in the middle of working through notes, but can't wait until that's out on DSPs because that'll be really cool.
Thank you. We will keep an eye out for that. And Jimmy, what's going on with the Hang, and how can people find out more about what's happening at the Magic Mix Room?
Well, you can. I have a site, Jimmy Douglas with two S's.com, and there's my site. And inside of there, you can actually reach out, and it talks about the Hang and other things, and that's how you can connect with me, really. And I'm setting up for like hopefully around the beginning of the year for the next Hang. So that's kind of in the works right about now.
And are there any other projects that you wanted to give a shout out
Well,
to that you're working on? Anything
I'm
exciting
actually
coming up?
I'm actually doing the I guess the rest of the Justin Timberlake catalog, the whole, because there's like 4 records he's done, and I think they're going to release that as some sort of special, thing. So I'm doing all that. I think the Missy Elliott stuff, I believe, is up next as well. So I'm doing a lot of stuff that I've done, um, which is great, and it's all fun. It's all fun, good stuff. It's been proven already. It's already proven it's legwork.
I think that's like the perfect situation where the original mix engineer or producer is involved in the Atmos mix, right? Like that's you get kind of breathe new life into classic material and rev it up again, which is super cool. Awesome. Well, Kiara Moreno, Jimmy Douglas, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
You too, man.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, well, thanks for everyone's patience off the top as we had a few technical issues with the go-to system, but hopefully on your screen now is a QR code for a 90-day trial download of the Dolby Atmos production suite. You can also grab that at professional.dolby.com. There you can also click through to download the Dolby Atmos music panner, the binaural settings plugin, and the Dolby Atmos album assembler. We also shared several studio and mixer resources and updates at the beginning of this session. So if you missed those, we'll post this video on YouTube and our professional site shortly. Thank you to everyone who pre-submitted questions. We got several, and a few I had to translate a little bit. So if I ask yours and it's not what you intended, you can certainly resubmit it in the questions tab. And of course, if you have a question you'd like to ask Jimmy here, please do so. Mr. Douglas, thank you for joining. How are you, sir?
I am good. I am good.
Great.
That was fabulous.
Well,
great job,
it's
man.
so much exciting work that you and Kiara and your team are doing over there, man. We got a lot of questions for people that are interested and want to connect with you, a lot of shout outs. So let's just jump right in. Suresh asks, what are your favorite headphones to use? Do you have a favorite?
Is this for me?
Yeah, that one's for you.
Oh, okay. Well, I have, of course, I use the, now they're not here.
Oh, there's Kiara. Hello.
Oh, there we go.
And then we'll follow up and ask you the same question.
Of course, I do use it seems to kind of be a standard, as it were. The Apple guys, they're kind of tasty. They're very neutral. I'll call them very neutral. And then I have also, shout out to this guy. Sorry about this.
Oh, it's all good. We're like
Intrigued.
hanging in your
I was
studio
so
with you.
intrigued, I wasn't ready. And then there's the Audio Ease, which are really kind of nice. They're kind of on the upscale side, but they feel great. And then there's some Audio Technicas that I have. I mean, as Kiara was saying in that broadcast, we try a bunch of different ones. And then of course I have the earbuds as well. Got to have those.
Yep. People are always curious about gear. That's like the #1 question typically that we get off the top is, what gear are you using? What do you like? And what's great about Atmos is that you can really use any gear that you're comfortable with. Kiara, do you have a favorite headphone?
My favorite would probably be the Apple, just because that's what a lot of people are using. So I like to reference that the most. But as Jimmy showed you, like we got a ton of options in house. So it's nice to be able to test it on different headphones.
Yeah, absolutely, and check the translation on different pieces.
Yeah.
So again, in the gear mode, do you have a preferred DAW of choice, either of you?
Pro Tools is typically what I work out of most of the time.
I do the Pro Tools. I've been working on making the Ableton do the same thing because I use Ableton a lot for creating stuff. And of course, Logic, I do believe comes with the Atmos system. So I think, you know, I'm just working to know that, so when people come in and they want to mix in that environment, I can be up to snuff on the game.
Yep, there's native panning within Pro Tools, and you can use the Dolby Renderer to use the Dolby Atmos Music Panner inside of Ableton as well, which is great. So tons of ways to be flexible and get creative. Elaine asked the question, how do you check your mixes? Do you do it in other studios or on home theater speakers?
Well, so I happen to be having a second room, which actually Kiara was in, and that's going to end up being an Atmos room. It's in the middle of being worked on right now.
Nice.
That system would be like an IK multimedia system, which is not as expensive, and it's more, you know, it's more available to the, I'll say, most people can afford to have a system like that. So now we have two rooms to check it against the two rooms, and basically I do a lot of my checking on the iPhone, where it's going to end up being, you know. But I mean, I think my room kind of says what it has to say. I've heard it in some other rooms, a few places around town. You know, but I think when you get it right, it's almost like mixing in a car. You know, it's like if you get it right, you don't have to go listen in the car.
Kiara, do you have any go-to methods for QCing?
For QCing, I mean, headphones, right?
Yeah.
As we discussed before, it's a necessity, right? I like to go back and forth, headphones, and then back into the room, back into headphones, back into the room, at least a couple times. And then with the COASTCITY stuff, I had the privilege of listening in one of your Dolby theaters. I, at that point, was not able to make any edits anymore, but it was a nice perspective. We also went around a couple of studios in LA, and got to hear it in those different spaces, which is really cool.
That is super cool. Nice. It's great that one file will translate to all of those playback environments, right?
Yeah.
Carl asked the question, and you talked about it a little bit in our conversation earlier, but like how the COASTCITY project actually came to you, Kiara.
I had known COASTCITY for a couple years before they approached me to do this Dolby mix. It was sort of like they wanted to do it. You know, they knew Apple was going to release it, and they just needed someone to do it. I guess a friend was like, "Oh, you know, Kiara's been doing a lot of Dolby. Just hit her up. Like, she's got this."
Yeah.
And they did. They came through. I played them some records, and they were like, "This is so cool. Like, will you please do this to our songs?" And I was like, "Of course, absolutely." And that's kind of how it started.
Awesome.
And by the way,
Well,
there is more COASTCITY Dolby music to come. So look out for
nice.
that.
That's great. And the album's awesome. And I actually ran into the guys in Las Vegas during Latin Grammy. So it was so
That's
good to actually meet them in person. They were awesome.
Yeah, they're an awesome duo. They're amazing people.
So this is kind of a broad question, but it's talking about, you know, treatment of different instruments when mixing in Atmos. Maybe Kiara, we can start with you. And I know this is probably dependent on the project. Maybe there are some kind of baseline techniques that you use, but how do you use vocals? This is Diego asking, how do you use vocals and drums when mixing in Atmos?
How do I use vocal and drums when mixing in Atmos?
Maybe
Well,
separate. You know, how do you like to treat vocals? How do you like to treat drums?
I typically keep most of the drums in beds. If that's kind of what he's asking. And vocals, you know, I like to spread them out, but they don't typically move too much unless, like, you know, maybe there's a delay that I want to create a cool effect with. But for the most part, they're not really moving too much. There's been some fun percussive stuff that I like to move around the room, but typically they sit in one place in the mix.
Yep, makes sense. Jimmy, do you have a take on that, vocals and drums? You talked about it a little bit in our conversation earlier, particularly with like treatment of lower frequencies, but anything on those two?
It's an interesting combination, vocals and you know, but yeah, I mean, I don't know if I get that specific necessarily. You know, like the thing is, we're all kind of, I said this before, we're all kind of learning and growing with this together. So there's no, the jury's not in on how to do anything. You know, you kind of use your ears and you feel it, and that would be the answer for me.
Yep, makes sense. Our buddy Alex Solano submitted a question a bit about your workflow and if it's changed. So specifically for you, Jimmy, he's asking how or has your mixing workflow changed? Are you mixing in stereo and then once the mix is approved, moving over to Atmos, or are you starting in Atmos and then sending a fold down for revisions?
Oh, that's interesting. No, I would say that I've actually been doing quite a bit of Atmos lately, and maybe not as many stereos as I should be doing. But so far, the twain has not met. I do a stereo mix, I turn it in, da 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 da. They haven't really thought about doing the Atmos. I guess budgetary partially is part of it too. And so yeah, and I haven't done any down mixes from Atmos. That's interesting. That's an interesting question, actually.
Yeah, Kiara, for you, a question about how you work with stems and recreating effects specifically. Do you find yourself trying to recreate the effects to be sonically the same, like for example, using like an immersive reverb, or are you sticking with the original source effect, like a reverb on a snare? Do you try to recreate it in Atmos or stick with the original effect?
I think it depends on the record, really. It's hard to, like kind of Jimmy was said, it's hard to have like a this is what I do every time. You know, every song is different. Like every stereo mix, you know, you kind of have to approach it differently if you want to service the song. So I yeah, it depends.
Yeah, absolutely. You're gonna kind of do what the song calls for, right? And
Y-
make your best
Yes,
judgment.
yeah. But sometimes, you know, if they're sending stems, it just kind of it's already done. If I add anything, it's really just to help complement what is there.
Hmm.
Yep. Jimmy, I don't know if you have a take on that, but there's a follow-up question on the stems, working from stems versus working from multi-tracks. Do you find that your mentality towards the mix actually changes when you start with the multi-track instead of rather than starting from a stem? Is that more flexibility?
I find that if I start with the stem, it's probably going to take me a lot less time to do this mix. That much I do know, because trying to match stuff that doesn't really have all those elements, I mean that's part of the biggest challenge. It's almost like you're remixing the record again. Not the word remix, but mixing the record again. And that can just, you know, be laborious, especially if you don't know everything that went in it. You don't know, like you were talking about reverbs. What reverb did they use? How long was it? Da 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 da. All this other stuff. If you give me the stems, I can kind of negotiate. And like Kiara was saying, I can enhance what you did. I can spread it out, and but it's still going to be the same shape that you thought you had it in. So it sounds like your record.
Yep. So another gear question, of course, I warned you that they would be coming fast and furious. So our buddy Sam asks, well, he says, I see that you use KRK speakers in your studios. Do you use any other speaker brands?
Well, I mentioned I'm using the IK Multimedias,
Yeah.
and let's see, I have some of those in here as well. I have a set of JBLs. I have JBLs around the place. This particular choice came because I think if in the interview we were doing earlier, I mentioned I realized I had enough stuff sitting around just to do it. And I do like the way they sound. That's like my old school sound. That's my old school secret, whatever you want to call it. So that's kind of why I use those. But and of course I have Osbergers. I have big speakers too, but I don't have enough to make the Atmos thing work.
Yep. Let's see here. A follow-up question from Suresh on the headphone workflow. Kiara, maybe we can start with you. How often are you switching between headphones and speakers while you're mixing?
I typically like to do most of it out in a room. There have been circumstances where I do have to start in headphones because of where I physically am. I don't have access to the Dolby room. So there have been times where I do the opposite, where I spend a lot of time in headphones in the beginning, and then I spend some time after just kind of fine tuning inside the room. So it really depends, but I like to go back and forth at least 2 or 3 times, you know, just, and by that I don't mean one listen. I mean like sitting through, making edits while I'm in that space.
Yep. Jimmy, how about for yourself? Are you frequently bouncing back and forth between headphones and speakers?
I'm really not frequently doing it because it's a little bit confusing. Almost like Kiara, and I almost get reversed because I have this nice system here.
Okay.
Yeah. So first of all, this is one little interesting thing that I have decided about this. It's not fact. It's just what I think. But speakers moving air sound totally different than the little pods that one would have on your ears to try to hear the spatial relationships. So I love the freedom of being in this air. And to those that are listening, if you can, when you do have, because you know we all can't afford to have it like this, but if you can and you have to work in this environment, I think that if it behooves you to, if you can find a few shekels somewhere, you can go to a place and just listen to your stuff, just to have a quick idea of what it sounds like with speakers pushing air, because it does change. It can. I think Kiara was sharing with me when she did the Coast City and you did a presentation. She called me when she went, "Oh my God, this sounds nothing like it sounded when I left." So you know, those are things I think that all of us, if we can, you know, you don't have to go mix it in a place that has that kind of stuff, but you go and you spend an hour or two, you listen to your work. It's not a bad idea if you can
Yep.
afford to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Let's see, one more here, and this is again kind of a broad one, and it's I'm sure dependent, but I'll ask you both. I'll start with you, Jimmy, and you talked about it a little bit in our conversation earlier, but what's your take on using the LFE channel? How do you like to manage the low frequencies in Atmos?
I personally, I would just love to drive. I just love to drive that sucker because it just feels so grand. It makes everything feel grand. But when I go to the buds and stuff, actually, it doesn't have the low end, so it just makes it kind of louder. So I have to compromise and be mindful, like, because it feels good in the room doesn't mean it's going to be okay for for most listeners and the little things where there is no sub. So. And that's also about, like I did mention, that's a battle that I hear amongst my cohorts, the same thing. Oh, do we need it? We don't need it. We need it. Everybody's still, the jury's not in. It's a great time for this, actually.
Nice, thank you. Kiara, do you have a take on LFE?
I mean, pretty similar to Jimmy, you know, we've explored a lot of this stuff together. And so, you know, I use it here, I use it there. I'm sometimes a little more delicate. I don't like to drive too much as Jimmy. Um, but you know, it's it just depends. Like like you
Yeah.
said.
Yep. Flexibility of the system and what the song calls for, right?
Yeah.
Well, with that, I'd like to thank my guests, Kiara Moreno, Jimmy Douglas. Thank you so very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
I'd like to wish everyone a very happy and safe holiday season. We'll be on break in December, and we'll return for our next session in January of next year. See you then. Thank you.